Welcome to the Locala podcast, everyone. I'm Lisa Anderson, your host and publisher of Locala magazine. Today, we have Stephen Yednick, also known as Element 115. He is you could call him a DJ, but yet not. He is also a songwriter. So welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get involved with the type of music that you're doing? What started your interest in music?
Well, back in the mid-'70s, when the classic rock era was around, I had an intense interest in music, and it turned into me putting together a PA. You know what a PA is? It's a public address system, but it was huge for live rock acts. And I eventually got in a club in New Haven, Connecticut, which was connected to CBGB's down in New York City. Mm-hmm. Connected by way of them sending us bands from New York. And some of them were well-known, some of them weren't. It depended upon the club's owner. Mm-hmm. Whether he wanted to pay them a certain amount or not.
Sure, yeah. Money. Absolutely.
So that's where it all started. Back in those days, it was called punk rock new wave, but it turned into like a variety of music, especially synthesized music in the 80s, and progressed from there.
Okay. What would you say your style of music is?
It's house music, and that back then, I was actually watching the house music scene because it was developing in the late 70s at a place called The Warehouse in Chicago. Okay. And Frankie Knuckles was the main DJ producer there. Mm-hmm. And he was actually working on house music, creating his own house music and playing in that club at that time. And so like it interested me. And house music is a derivative of disco, only it's more underground.
Okay, I was just going to say, maybe you describe what house music is. Yeah.
Disco was totally commercial.
Okay.
It's for the people working in offices or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I had no idea. They were weekend rock stars, so to speak. They'd come in all dressed up. House music wasn't like that. It was total underground. But it had a rhythm and blues influence that was a lot deeper and much better sounding. So I became interested in that, and that's when I left the club and we moved to New Hampshire, because I was in Connecticut in the club, to start a family up in New Hampshire. I left that scene and I continued to monitor the house music scene, and it progressed into a whole bunch of different styles, trance being one of them. But house music is still relative to the R&B scene.
Okay.
Older rhythm and blues, not today's rhythm and blues.
Okay.
All right. The 70s rhythm and blues, which I always liked. I grew up in the 60s. Okay. Okay, when you had Diana Ross and the Supremes and all those people that came out of Detroit. They produced all kinds of rhythm and blues stars, and that's where my history came from. Of course, I was still interested in Jeff Beck and, all these blues bands and blues artists that are now called classic rock people styles, but my interest was in both. Which was unusual. Most of the time, people either like rhythm and blues or rock. Yeah. But I had a wide array of interests. So that's where it started. Okay. It started in the 70s, progressed up until where I am now. I got kind of tired of mixing other people's music in the early 2000s. And so I figured, well, let me try to create my own. And I'd say in 2011 or so, I started experimenting with digital audio workstations. There should be venues where people can play even for free, like I would be willing to do, just to express an art form for people to enjoy themselves. It's hard to find gigs now, especially after the pandemic. Mm-hmm. People are closed up now.
Like, how did you really develop your style as you were going forward?
Well, like I say, I watched other DJs in the system and how they created. Okay. And so, like, I really liked it. And I picked a certain style of house music. Most of my music, if you've reviewed it or if you will review it, you'll find out that I like female singers. I like the way they sing. So, like, a high percentage of my creations are with female singers. Now, I didn't have intentions of making money off of this music. Sure. But I wanted to reveal it. Yeah. To the public for enjoyment. I did it for spirituality, as an art form, like I mentioned earlier. Yeah. To give people enjoyment.
Absolutely.
Okay? There's a man you you interviewed on a podcast. He is an ordained minister, and I read through some of the people.
John Jackson.
Right, John
Yes.
Jackson. That's my angle.
Okay.
Although I'm not an ordained minister,
Yeah.
I'm not into like religion in a typical sense of the word. It's more of a spirituality.
Yeah.
I follow his method. I'm not necessarily into this for money.
Yeah.
He's into it to help people.
Absolutely.
And in a way, I want to too. Because if you bring enjoyment into a person's life,
Yeah.
that's essential.
That is very essential. I agree. So, what would you say would be your biggest influences now when you're creating your music?
The style of music, the R&B influences. If you listen to Frankie Knuckles, right? If anybody listening to this podcast wants a key description of the music, go on YouTube and put Frankie Knuckles down. Listen to some of it.
Okay.
Okay, it's that's what I'm into. That's the style I want to eventually totally create to. I'm jazz influenced too, but it's house jazz. It isn't, New Orleans
Okay.
jazz.
What's kind of the release that you get when you create this music? How does it help you? Because I know you're doing it for other people, but it's got to feel pretty good for yourself as well. So what's kind of that release that you get for yourself?
Is Euphoria?
Yeah. Yeah, Euphoria definitely
It's like,
fits.
rather than going out and drinking or taking a drug, I get it from music.
Okay. Well, is there anything else about your music that you'd like us to know?
Well, I like to do gigs, and I'm willing to do things for free for people if it's just cause. If they need the money, say like
For a charity or something like that,
a
yeah?
religious organization,
Yeah.
although I'm not religiously oriented in the typical, like I said,
Yeah.
or spiritually oriented. That doesn't matter.
No.
It has to be a just cause. It has to be
Okay.
for children with cancer or something like that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. I really appreciate it. And if you want to learn more about him, we'll go ahead and link his Facebook information in the description below. Thank you guys for joining us for this little special edition with DJ Element 115, Stephen Yednick. And once again, I'm Lisa Anderson, your host and publisher of Locala Magazine. Thank you for joining us here on the podcast where we focus on connections through stories.
Music is the way your brain processes music is very similar to how it processes the written language. So it's essentially like when we read a book, our brain is taking symbols and like encoding them, processing them, and turning them into meaningful words or sounds. And the same thing happens in music.